for years, we threw around the word accountability. Everybody wanted it, but nobody wanted to be accountable. Today, you go on a PIP, 30 days, you're out. Like, this is a job. And if you applied for a job and then you need professional development, then that's another decision point, whether or not you belong here. And so I don't want to say it's cutthroat, but it is much more like focused on what's important, on performance targets. And in order to continue growing, like, you want a team who embraces that, because they're here to do a job. It's just like a team in sports. If you said you could run the ball X amount of yards, or give us enough assists to get goals, but you're not hitting those targets, you're getting benched.
Welcome to the Seven Figure Accountant Podcast. I'm excited to have with me today Daniel from GrowthLab Financial Services. Daniel, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Nick. Appreciate it. Thanks for the opportunity.
Now, Daniel, you didn't go down the traditional path, if you want to call it that, for building a firm, but what made you become an accountant in the first place?
Yep. So I kind of tripped my way into this. I'll start there, and then I'll add, I'm actually not an accountant. I'm not a CPA. I actually had spent 15 years in corporate America before jumping into the world of fractional CFO services, and then ultimately acquiring my first accounting firm, bookkeeping firm, back in 2014, 2015. And that turned out to probably be the longest dating period that I've ever had. I think it took us 9 months to actually close the deal. I was a little skittish, but yeah, that's kind of my background. I'm actually corporate finance, M&A, business strategy. Spent about 4 years doing restructurings post 2008, and yeah, I kind of found myself here in 2013, 2014, doing fractional CFO work for venture-backed startups, mostly in the Boston area.
So what made you go into your own firm? So you're in the corporate world. What made you come across to this side and decide to buy a firm and continue to grow and scale like you have?
Yeah. So again, in a million years, if we had a conversation 12 or 15 years ago, this was not in the cards. I think it was actually a different day. I ended my corporate career in 2012. I had spent 4 years as part of a small team that liquidated a commercial finance business, part of a Fortune 500 industrial. And, back then, this was Lehman Brothers collapsing, the world falling apart, the great, not resignation, but the Great Recession. I had a great 4 years, but I also realized coming into the 38, 39 years old at the time, I knew I did not want to find myself here again 10, 15 years ago. It was sort of like my first and last, although now I would probably have a different perspective. It was going to be the last time that I could probably do something for myself, and kind of got the entrepreneurial bug. Went from corporate to working in the world of like startups, which was totally foreign to me. And, you're going from doing $1 billion deals to like high-fiving $50,000 angel investor checks. It's like night and day. But I got excited about it. And, but then again, I started realizing like, hey, I'm not really good with debits and credits. I didn't know what QuickBooks was or Xero. I realized like I was a little bit of a sitting duck as a mercenary CFO, which is how I viewed myself back then. And I realized like, hey, I kind of have to hire accountants, and I didn't know where to start. And so I ended up hiring a couple of accountants in 2014, and I realized there's no way I'm going to get this done. Bookkeeping, accounting was a whole lot less about debits and credits and more about understanding the system integrations, to be able to produce timely, accurate financials. And so anyways, I kind of again, fell into the world of ETA, entrepreneurship through acquisition, which was something you didn't hear about back then. And I said, I'm going to take a 1 year of my retention package, severance package, and I bought an accounting business and signed the deal on April 17th, 2015.
So that's a pretty big leap of faith to use, I suppose, the money that you've got for your future to buying a firm and buying time, if you want to call it that, to see if it will work. What did the first acquisition look like? So how big was the accounting firm? And I suppose what made you go down the path of going, I'm going to buy something rather than market and build it? Because firms don't struggle, obviously, to get clients. So what was the thought pattern around the acquisition, particularly that early in the journey?
Yeah. So a few things. Back then, it was just me, myself, and I doing consulting work for what it's worth. I was fortunate enough to meet a few people along the way that I felt like, okay, they're going to be good for the foundation of a business. Like, I knew I didn't want to be a consultant. I knew I didn't want to just eat what you kill. I knew I didn't want to be as good as your last gig. Like, I wanted something that I could grow, and hire and bring on some awesome people, which I did. And I realized, like, to build a bookkeeping business, it was going to take me years. One, I didn't walk in their shoes, right? So if you had left, I wouldn't be able to step into your shoes. So you needed to have scale right away. Otherwise, it was just tethered with risk. And that to me is hard to sell, because part of our sales pitch has always been like business continuity. We worry about de-risking people, systems, processes, technology. And so it was a nice opportunity. I came across this bookkeeping business back in probably early summer, spring of 2014. And I literally approached her and I said, hey, what's your plan? What's your exit strategy? And she looked at me like, what's an exit strategy? I said, like, you're going to like extend the journey of your employees, customers, you maybe get a couple bucks, right, for retirement. And it turned out like it worked out. And ultimately so what did this business look like? Back then, this was unheard of, right? Today is very different. So back then, it was about a $500,000 book of business. It came with 12, 15 employees, which probably equated to 8 FTEs. It came with about 100, 120 customers, some of which we still have 11 years later, actually 10 years later. Actually, what am I talking about? It's going to be the 10th anniversary this April, acquisition. And I had found a great COO. He understood the startup world, great operator. And so with the combination of having found some really good people that, I could probably hold on to as we go through this, and then this book of business plus the customer list that I had started building out over the prior 12 months, it was a great, it was a stepping stone. Like, it was a jumping off point.
Yeah, so there's 8 team members. I mean, the revenue per team member is not huge, but it obviously gives you that accelerator. So when you started, so you bought the business, did you have a clear plan of what you wanted the business to look like 10 years' time? Or was it more do the first acquisition, see how it goes, and find your way along the way? How did you take, I suppose, the strategic approach, or did you just go with it?
Yeah. So for starters, I always used to tell everybody, which again, 10 years later, like, it's very different then, was these are not intrinsic value businesses as from the perspective of like a finance 101, right? These are cash flow businesses. They have to cash flow. You have to hit the right metrics. And back then it was 33% to wages, 33% to overhead, 33% to distributions. What you do with that bottom half of the 33%, in this case, I always used to preach delay of gratification. We plowed everything back into the business. Did I have a clear plan? Yes, from day one, it was about scaling, because I started bringing on people who were not technicians early on. Early on, they were more business partner feel. And so with that, you knew you needed to scale rapidly. But one of the things I also recognized was the business we bought was very much grounded in sort of a traditional version one of outsourcing. I have an employee. I send them to a customer site, the office, the factory, wherever it may be, the home office in some cases, and I would charge by the hour. You didn't have any control over what that employee really did while they were off site. The technology was also back in the day. It was before Xero, before QuickBooks Online. It wasn't before Xero. It was like all of that was starting to come. Was sort of starting to bubble up. But the technology also held you back, right? On-premise versus cloud, employees at customer sites versus, in this case nowadays, fully remote. And then the hourly billing really the hourly billing capped what you could make on a gross margin basis. I wrote a piece about sort of like the last 10 years versus the next 10 years, where the migration from cloud versus the migration to AI automations, the journeys are going to look very different and the outcomes are going to look very different. Back then, moving to the cloud really allowed us to maximize our gross margins, right? We were able to go to our customer and say, hey, on average, we're charging you for 10 hours worth of work. Back then, it was like $30 an hour, $40 an hour. Here's how much we can charge you on a monthly basis. And then behind the scenes, we can tweak things and bring in technology and standard operating procedures to ultimately maximize our margins beyond what we could do with the I pay an employee X, I charge them out at Y minus X is my capped margin.
Yeah, no, really interesting. So you have branded the business very differently, and which I love. You call yourself a finance as a service business. And before we started the podcast, I said, look, how's America's in tax season now? I said, how's tax season going? You said, well, I don't do any of that. The team does, though. I love that approach that you've taken it on as an entrepreneurial journey, not I'm going to come in and become a technician and build a team around me. And that's obviously been part of the success. So after you did the acquisition, what did the next few years look like? Was it just natural organic? Were you marketing to continue growth? Did you do more acquisitions? What did the next 2 or 3 years look like?
Yeah, so a big chunk of the next 3 years was transformation. And I would say at the company, we've gone through 2 transformational cycles. The first one was very focused on moving employees from being located in customer sites to the office or home office. Also integrating the technology, moving from on-premise to remote. It was also focused on the pricing model. That was actually a huge challenge back then because customers were used to paying for 1 hour, $1, right? That sort of connection is very simple, and it's hard to change behaviors. The other big thing was also changing the behavior of employees, which I would argue that was actually a 10-year journey, which was actually triggered the onset of the second transformation of our company in December of 2023. And so changing the culture, changing people. Remember, when you buy a business, again, that maybe it's a lot different today, but I would argue like there's a ton of CPA firms that if you bought them, you'd probably go through the same process. It's hard to change people, right? It's hard to change people. It takes time. And when you're not the technician, it's really hard to push the envelope. I went to a conference, I think it was actually Scaling New Heights back in 2016 or 2017. And I was listening to, I think it was Ed Klotz. And I proposed to him, I was like, but we want to do this, but the team's not embracing it. And his quick response was, which I appreciated, right? It was like, last time I checked, you are the owner. Just tell your employees to do it. And yeah, there's a lot of truth to that, but there's other things to consider. So 3 years was really about changing those 3 or 4 things and the culture of the business. So then, as we kind of progressed, by 2017, we had what I would call 80% of what we wanted a cloud accounting business to be. that's when we began to build out the financial planning and analysis piece of our business. So you've got the bookkeeping and accounting, you've got the FP&A, you've got the CFO, you've got the tax, the HR, and we also have Streams, our AI automation agency. Like, to go from the accounting to the CFO, we knew that like the key to success in this business, it's leverage. A big chunk of the opportunity is human leverage. And so we knew that to provide CFO services on a fixed price, highly scoped out basis, you were going to need the analysts, the financial analysts, to help build out those models. And so that was the beginning of the journey to what we, back then I wouldn't have articulated as finance as a service, but by 2018, 2019, that's what we were feeling more. And that's really where this all came from.
And what did the revenue growth look like in those first 3 to 4 years? Like, where were you at, like by 2017, 2018? What did the revenue look like?
Yeah, I'll tell you, in 2015, in the summer or fall of 2015, our target for 2017 was 2 million. We never hit it. We were always behind on our targets. And if I had to like pinpoint why, think is we didn't jump into our go-to-market strategy, our GTM. Our GTM was still very grounded in physical networking. You know somebody that knows someone. So we didn't embrace earlier on, like we embraced the whole like website and started blogging, which was great because 12 years later, like I got to tell you, I would hate to start a new business because you're never going to get on that first page of Google. It's going to take forever, unless somebody's already looking for you and they know it's a branded search. So we were fortunate enough to like start building the foundation of our digital marketing. But if I go back, like if there's something I would have done, if there's something I would have pushed more for, it's the marketing and getting out there more in the market. So where were we? It was kind of like half $500,000 in 2015. My gut tells me it was about 750 in 2016. 2017, we had another good bump. 2018 was a flattish, but definitely broke $1 million by 2017. 2019 was a good solid year. I think by then we were already over 2. 2020 turned out to be like a tale of 2 years, just like 2024. Kind of coming in strong. We actually just did an acqui-hire in January. We were about to do one in January of 2020. As a matter of fact, me and 2 of my other shareholders, I think our last meal together was with a gentleman that we were hiring, but also came with a book of business. Ultimately, we paused it, but ultimately by the end of April of 2020, we ended up hiring. We were like, let's go big or go home. If COVID's going to take us out, at least it's going to take us out trying. And we brought him in, which was great. It kickstarted our tax division. It literally grew up from $0 in 2020 to about 700,000 in 2024. And it was a good business, especially in the latter year or two, because tax continued to build, especially with a lot of the new legislation, which I couldn't really tell you much about, but they tell me it was a net positive for that department. But it helped offset the flattening out of the accounting business. So accounting actually, for the first time in like 8 years, 2023, if you remove the effects of acquisitive growth, accounting was flat. Last year, flat. This year will also be flat. And I've got my reasons for that, but so tax was a great move. And then the last 2 things was we did another acquisition in April of 2022 and another acquisition in January of 2023.
So with the acquisitions, because there's a few of them along the way, what are some of the biggest lessons you learned, the things you did well and lessons that you've learned that you've applied to future acquisitions or even to the ones that you did buy? Like what's the secret around that? Because it's obviously gives you the income straight away and it gives you a bunch of clients and potentially team members. But a lot of firm owners are not necessarily doing it, even though there's plenty of opportunity in the market.
Yeah, I could probably write a book on all the lessons. If I were to like nail down to just two, I would say one, by the time you hit scale, and these one and two are probably connected to each other because it has to do with organizational structure, management operating systems. I would say one is you're going to get to a place where, your grit, and I've got like crazy grit, tenacity. That's not going to move the needle. Once you get to a point, and I don't know what size it is, it's probably less about revenue and more about people. And it's probably somewhere around the 20 person mark, 25 person mark. And it depends on how diversified your departments and functions are. You're going to get to a point where that that unit of tenacity, grit, however you want to measure it, like that moves the needle when you've got nothing. That moves the needle when you have five people. But that doesn't really move the needle when you have 40 people. And that was a tough learning for me. Um, and and it started this like reflection, self-reflection, business reflection. And there's this good book out there. I won't say it's great, but it's really good because it's almost like a no-brainer type book. But what got you here is not going to get you. It's like a stupid obvious, right? For a guy who like knows it all, like, what happened? And I think ultimately the lessons from the acquisitions are, it's like you can't do the next acquisition the way you did the first one. The way you did the first one, you didn't like. Everybody has a choice, but I'll just speak for myself. I didn't have a choice. I had to learn everything about that business. And I've talked to a few guys who have done acquisitions to get into the accounting space who are far from being an accountant, never mind a bookkeeper or a tax professional. It's like you have to own it. And I'm not talking just own it on paper. This isn't like about owning title to something, but you got to own it. You got to own the numbers. You got to own the behaviors. You got to own the vision, the target. Like you have to have your finger on the pulse of everything. But the next one and the next one and 10 years later, like you can't. You can't. There's a leap of faith. So you talked about like the first acquisition was a leap of faith. Yeah, no, that was a gamble of my savings and my marriage and a lot of other things.
You
This
backed
is,
yourself.
yeah, this becomes more of a leap of faith in what you've built is going to be able to sustain it. And the acquisition we did in 2023, I came to the realization what we as a team, as shareholders, as everybody who's ever touched this, what we built began to fall apart when we did that last acquisition in 2023. And that began, that started that what I refer to as our second transformational cycle. That was it. I knew I had to make some big changes.
So what happened? So what was the second transformation that you made, and what did that last acquisition do to trigger that?
It was learning about Dan. What kind of manager was I? Am I? Do I have what type of manager do I have to be? I think you know, I I sort of led the business into a place where it felt like a country club, an old boys club. It was about relationships and not about the business. What did we want out of the business? It was about like not fulfilling our big whys. Um, and it was about realizing the framework we had put in place, whether it's the right people in the right seats, management operating systems, who's on first, who's on second kind of conversations. Like, are we in a place where if a small acquisition like this that came with just 3 employees almost took us down to our knees. Like, what does that mean for us in, in the future? It was not a good place to be. And by the way, the proof was in the number, not just, it's not gut feeling. It's not about people. It was about the numbers. And there were market dynamics. There are headwinds that many accounting firms were not recognizing in 2023. We were all still high-fiving from a strong economy. Inflation that kind of felt like it was kind of going in the right direction. And then there was a lot of chatter about the Federal Reserve cutting interest rates, right? But we still had a strong economy. I think a few things really came to head. AI was the first one. And I'm not talking about AI replacing jobs just yet. I think all the AI generated content, it blew up how we operated in the digital marketing world for the last 5 or 6 years. And a lot of the AI content really created too much content that Google and Microsoft would deem as garbage. And that really took a big chunk of our organic growth, not to mention the economy was actually going in the other direction. Margin compression was a real thing. You were coming off of the heydays of post-COVID where companies they were just tripping over each other with all that free money that was out there to try to figure out how do you go from on-premise to cloud-based technology. The pie was growing exponentially, and you could charge whatever you wanted because there's enough free money out there for everybody. Until all this kind of came to head the summer of 2023. And it really showed up in Q1 of 2024. So personally, I'm sad because they were tough decisions to restructure and reorg, but ultimately they were the right decisions, tough decisions. And I'm actually content that we started the process at the end of Q4 2023 to get ahead of this in 2024.
What does the business look like today? So what's the size of the team, rough revenue figures? Like what's it look like today after obviously making some tough decisions in the second transformation, but you've had great growth through that short journey in business, if we want to call it short. It has been a good long journey, but yeah, what's the business look like today?
So we were at about 3.5 million coming into 2024. Margin compression was happening, both gross margin and free cash flow margin. Cost of capital was increasing. 2024 turned out to be somewhat of a flat-ish year on the accounting side. The good news is it really was about the team executed on all fronts, protect the franchise value on the accounting side, continue to expand the tax side. Our AI automation team, they helped keep revenue going. HR became a big move for us in 2024. We went from zero MRR, or there was some MRR, but it wasn't solid, good MRR, to about 11,000 MRR in 12 months. FP&A finally started to come back. So FP&A took a big dip in 2023 in the CFO services. But fortunately, by mid-2024, we were well-positioned to capture the new growth. I think we picked up 22 new customers within a 6-month period in the second half of 2024. So today, we're about 4 million. This year, I'm not expecting growth for accounting. If anything, I think you're going to see continued compression on the bottom half of the personas in the marketing, your typical cash basis. I really think AI and competing with AI native general ledgers it's a real thing. And I think it's really going to show up in the second half of this year. But it's expanding the suite of CFO services that's really going to solidify our ability to go wide and go deep with our existing customer base. we do see a lot of like new activity in the startup world, especially on the capital market side. So we're confident like we're going to see growth. If anything, our headcount has shrunk. I believe we were at about 48 team members sometime in December of 2023 or January 2024. So that's been a good thing for us. Net, I believe it's a net positive. Doing more with less. So productivity, efficiency, margins are going in the right direction now. So I think as of right now, we're at about 38 or 42 team members, but on a FTE equivalent, we're probably about 24. Yeah, probably 24.
So that's been, I mean, that in itself
Sorry,
from the,
I'm sorry, 32. Yeah, 30. Yeah.
so it's been a great journey. I mean, if you look back from when the first acquisition you've had strong revenue growth, obviously good revenue per team member. You've diversified in some, and this is, I think, a key part is your services. HR as a service is not normal. I suppose for accounting firms or firms or businesses like yours, you've taken a very strategic approach as a non-accountant, if you want to call it that, as treating it like a business. I think you've mentioned a few things that I just want to touch on. And you're 100% right. Up to about 20, 25 team members, it's you and a team, and you can be, you've got different relationships with them, but as you grow and it becomes a business, you need to become a leader as opposed to, a manager. And I think that's a fundamental shift that people struggle with because they're used to becoming friendly or even friends or even good mates with a lot of their team. But as the business grows, they don't need a mate, they need a leader. And I think that's a pivotal shift that you touch on. How did you learn to do that? Because it's tough. And I've been through that journey where I was mates with them. And then I had to go, you know what? They need a great leader. They don't need a mate. They can go and get mates outside of work or friends. What was the couple of things that helped you transition to become a great leader of the business as opposed to one of the country club or one of the boys club or that you'd built?
Yeah, it was not easy, right? I really had to, I did a lot of reading. I'll start there. A lot of soul searching. What is it that we want here? A lifestyle business or a scaling business? Unfortunately, that train left the station 4 years ago. It's very hard to revert back to a lifestyle business because then that's more blood in the water. Really had to ask ourselves, what do we want? Like, what do we really want out of this? I kind of did it in a way where I tried to respect existing contracts, agreements, gave people enough leeway, essentially giving people the freedom to stay or to go. A lot of therapy, good, solid business coaching. After 9 years of, it's not even running a business, it's really your lifestyle. It's a big change. It's a huge change. Sure, you can be the guy who's just like, well, it is what it is. It's not. Things in life are more important than just like, it is what it is. Like, these are real people, real relationships. And yes, there's a point where you let go. And then there's also a point of like, are the people who actually decided to stay, are they the right people? Why do they want to stay? What do they want out of me? What do they want out of the business? And so those are really the healthy conversations I have had to have throughout 2024. And I pretty much turned over the entire team. I would count upwards of 22 people turned over in a matter of a year. I'll tell you what it's created. For years, we threw around the word accountability. There was never any accountability. Everybody wanted it, but nobody wanted to be accountable. Today, you go on a PIP, 30 days, you're out. That's it. we're not family. I'm not here to take care of you. Like, this is a job. And if you applied for a job and then you need professional development, then that's another decision point, whether or not you belong here. And so I don't want to say it's cutthroat, but it is much more like focused on what's important, on performance targets. And in order to continue growing, like, you want a team who embraces that because they're here to do a job. It's just like a team in sports. If you said you could run the ball X amount of yards or give us enough assists to get goals, but you're not hitting those targets, you're getting benched. It's not because we don't love you. It's not because, we can't be friends. It's just like, you ain't playing on my team. It's different.
Yeah, and I think the journey that you've gone through is one that I personally have gone through with the growth of my different businesses. And, there's some hard times where reflection, learning, and they're tough decisions. And it's a change for you as a leader. But the reality is that business is so much better for it and you're better for it. And when you can make that transition, it's tough because it's not what you've been used to. So thank you for sharing that. I think that alone is a huge lesson. You mentioned a few other things throughout the conversation. Obviously, the investment into digital marketing at the start has paid, obviously, tailwinds 10 years plus later. And I think that these are the things that most firm owners don't do, is that what you do today is going to help you in 10 years. You may not necessarily get the results straight away. In some cases, you will. What are some of those other foundational things that you put in place along the journey that you look back now and go, I'm glad we started it then as opposed to just doing it now?
I think digital marketing was a big one. Outside of that, I think I would have taken a step back. I would answer this in the reverse. Not answering your question the way you directed it, but I would have said, I think I made investments too soon, too deep, that in hindsight, I would have been more agile and dependent on revenue growth, actual revenue growth. If you and I knew each other 10, 11 years ago, like, I would always say, build the factory first, right? Pre-sell, don't sell. Definitely don't sell what you can't make, right? And I used to be it was like 25 years ago. My boss used to say, stop selling what we don't make, right? You got to be able to make it. You got to be able to produce it. But I also think there's a balance. And so that's one thing I probably would have definitely done different. I think other things that we put in place early on was really a function of the business we bought. There were like 40, 50 file cabinets. Like, I was having nothing to do with that. Like, so on day one, it was like 40, 50 file cabinets out the door, bringing in a cloud-based document management platform. So those things early on, I probably would have gone deeper with more changing people's behavior. And so one place I would have invested more in is management, like real structured management operating systems to rotate through people faster. Holding on to people is not a good idea because those behaviors are going to get exacerbated and they're going to get magnified as you grow. Remember, like, revenue covers up a lot of sins, but not human behavior.
Yeah, I think that's a big one, is having the process and systems so it doesn't rely on people. You can just put more people in. Now, you mentioned something as well, Daniel, before around something you called Streams, which is the AI automation. So to me, can you explain a little bit more around what you're doing in AI? You mentioned that you've got some team members in this. So do you want to talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, totally. So, again, delay of gratification, always investing, always be investing. So in April 2022, we acquired a business. It was owned by Heather Satterley, who's now with the Woodard Group. And Heather had a business to the side that was focused on training and development. Training and consulting to other accounting firms. And one of the things I knew is I didn't want to go into consulting. And so one of my team members, Corey, he liked this stuff. He enjoyed the technology, enjoyed the consulting, and he had been very agile through the 10 years that he had been with us. He was actually my first intern in May of 2015. He actually just parted ways with us a few weeks ago. He went to go to a CPA Academy, but he led the effort around streams for the last 2 years. And so we essentially moved from this consulting one-to-one activity to, okay, how do we actually build these workflow automations for other accounting firms? That was really the first thing we were thinking about. But before we did that, we ended up hiring our first dev team member in May of 2022. And we actually had him working with Heather and with Corey and with Katie, who's our director of continuous improvement. They were working on internal automations, automating our own workflows. And we got super stoked about this. We're like, hey, this stuff is money. Like, cool stuff, like things that would drive me crazy. Like, hey, did this person sign that engagement agreement? Did this prospect actually book a meeting? And so some of our first automations was just like, hey, we have Slack. Why doesn't Slack just tell us what's going on in the business? And boom, literally from one day to the next, I'm getting Slack saying this person booked, this person signed an engagement agreement, this happened, this didn't happen. And so I started making a few phone calls to some friends. And I said, hey, this was definitely August of 2024 or 2022. And I said, what if we offered this to you? Do you see value in this? And the first 3 conversations we had, we were giving it away for free to test it out. And the last 2 conversations we had, they turned around and said, you don't have to give it for free, we'll pay for it. I was like, all right, we're on to something. And we would make this so that it'd be like $300, $500 a month. We build it, develop it. We don't charge you for that. And then we would maintain it just like a typical IT managed service contract. And we did that for about a year and a half. And so last summer, we even sponsored Scaling New Heights. We went there to exhibit, and it was great. A lot of good, solid demand. But one of the things we were realizing was this market, as we all know, is highly fragmented. And there's a certain portion of this market where it's really the business owner that's controlling and managing a lot of the activity in the business, especially under that less than 8 employees, less than 10. And they would come to us and be like, automate this for us. And be like, great. And then we're like, what do you want to automate? Everything. We're like, well, we can't do everything. Like, you can't boil the oat. We need what platform do you have? And then we realize, oh, you're still on-premise based platforms. Yeah, we can't work with it. Oh, can you migrate us? Can you consult? And we're like, yes, but now you're diverting resources away from what our core business. Anyways, long story short, we kind of came to the conclusion, we can't just lead with workflow automations for accounting firms. There's too much seasonality, and those firms that are less than 10, that doesn't really have a dedicated ops person, it's very hard to automate because they really don't have documentation of processes of the current state. How are you going to go from the current state to the future state? You can't just blue sky this stuff. And so we decided to pause in late fall of last year, here in the States. And we decided with the advent of AI, and we were starting to feel like 2025 is going to be the year of the AI agent. It was on the Super Bowl commercials, 3 later. And so what we decided to do is slow down what was streams. We were focusing on workflow automations for accounting firms. We slowed down the marketing and began to refocus on our own needs and started building out AI agents and AI automations for our own company once again. So literally almost 3 years later, we're refocusing on our business because we stopped refocusing because we were focused on these new customers. And ultimately, my plan is to have the team focusing on GrowthLab for the next 6 months and start marketing to medium-sized operating businesses, specifically their accounting and finance functions that, by the way, touch sales, touch operations, production, and stuff, and take it from there. But I'm excited for that.
Yeah, I think there's a big lesson in that in itself. I see lots of a lot smaller accounting firms that go and build out all these new businesses and services when just focus on you and just scale it and add more value to your customers, and you're going to obviously grow at a quicker and more meaningful rate. You've had an awesome journey, and this has been a podcast that I've thoroughly enjoyed because it's very different than the traditional, path into accounting and growth. And I think the take of how you've been able to grow it is you can see that you're an entrepreneur, you can see that you've approached this from a business, and I think that that's a huge part of how you've been able to be successful without being a CPA. Where do you see the business in 5 to 10 years?
Yeah. So I definitely see the AI automation side. We're spinning that off, putting it into its own entity, partly because I am raising capital to recapitalize the balance sheet. I did execute on one buyout. So we have to clean up the balance sheet. Secondly, focusing on ourselves with an eye towards margins, free cash flow margins. And so that's been my biggest focus outside of streams. It's focusing on our gross margins and our net operating profit before distributions or I forget what you guys call it, but discretionary spending by shareholders. Focusing on that. I am in the process of, I've been talking to a few investors. I do believe that there is opportunity. At 49, I really don't want to be grinding it out at 55. So I've got this 5-year time horizon. I do believe that the foundation of our business is in a much better place than it was 5 years ago. Our cost structures are back what I would consider to be the new norm, right? I don't think we're going to go back to the days of 66% gross margins for monthly accounting services. But you still need to protect those margins, and AI automation is a key to success there. But there's also another key to success. It's the human in the loop, focusing on the relationship and focusing on doing more, going deeper with these customers. So I'm pretty pumped where we are right now. If you look back, trailing 6 months, starting last February to September versus the prior year, 6 months, it's like night and day. Revenue growth is flattish, maybe 4 to 5%, but margin expansion is a real thing. And we're actually throwing off cash. The bankers need to see that. Investors need to see that, not just to achieve the valuations that we want, but you need to show that this business has solid financial fundamentals. And so those are the 2 or 3 places. And marketing, I got to tell you, is going to be, marketing is just going to continuously evolve faster and faster. Post-COVID, human beings want community. Back to community, places like Reddit, the top of the funnel activity, it's dead. It's dead. SEO is very hard to tweak. You used to be able to tweak stuff all the time and improve. There's no tweaking anymore. Now it's a full marathon. And with that, you protect what you have and find and figure out new innovative ways to nurture the middle of the funnel. That's going to be the key to success, not more at the top of the funnel.
Yeah, some marketing mentors of mine have said to me, there used to be top, middle, and bottom of funnel. Now it's just one funnel, and you've got a bit of everything everywhere. There's no traditional path. But Daniel, thank you so much for everything that you've shared today, for, I suppose, being brutally honest through the good and bad times. And I definitely know that people would have got a lot out of today. So thanks for being on the show. And yeah, great to meet you and have you on the show today.
Thanks, Nick. It's always a journey, man.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to subscribe and follow us on socials so you don't miss the next episode.